Our next witness is Dr. Robert Young, who has graciously come a very long way to be here today from California in the United States. Dr. Robert Young is widely recognized as one of the top researchers and clinical scientists in the world. He has developed his life to researching the true causes of disease, subsequently developing something known as the new biology to help people around the world reverse any sickness, any ailment, any disease, and to begin to rebalance their lives, reclaim their health and their wellness. Mr. Young is a controversial character in as much as he appears to be one of the most targeted individuals on Earth amongst the 7.5 odd billion souls that inhabit the surface of the Earth. Mr. Robert Young is probably one of the top dozen targeted individuals by the global corporatocracy, the global pharmaceutical enterprise, that element of the global pharmaceutical enterprise which appears, I say advisedly, appears to have been weaponized against humanity. And it is the very reason why we are here today and this week, unapologetically. Dr. Robert Young, you're very welcome to this tribunal. Thank you for coming.
Very grateful to be here. Thank you, Sasha, for your invitation. It's been a pleasure meeting all of you individually, and I appreciate this opportunity to share with you some of my travels over the last, I think it's been 40 years. Time flies when you're having fun. It has been, it's been quite a ride, up and down, and it's amazing how people you collect along the ride when you're moving up, and you truly find out who are your true friends, people that care about you when things don't go the way you anticipate on the way down. I don't consider myself on the way down. I feel like it's just another opportunity for me to learn and grow. So I take every challenge as the true goal as I move towards my ultimate goal, and that is to each one teach one, and empowering individuals so that they can take care through understanding their own bodies. Because I truly believe in this principle that it is your life, it is your body, and truly your choice. I know along the way there are powers to be that want to put impediments in the way to slow you down, and if you don't slow down, then they notch it up a few. And they gave me a warning in 1996 where I was charged with 2 counts. Those went away because there was no evidence that they could prosecute me on. And yet, not Wikipedia, I call it Wackopedia, uses that as a bullet because I learned that what the opposite side is trying to achieve is headlines. And the headlines is what they use through the media to destroy you. I didn't really get the picture, even after being on major network shows, constantly on Fox News, having been on Oprah Winfrey, having a good relationship with Dr. Oz, who told me I was on the top 10 list. He was number 7, I was number 8. As you know, he had to testify in front of Congress about his actions as he deviates away from conventional medicine to more alternative medicine thought, you notice that his program changed dramatically. So, yes, I was on that top 10 list, as Sasha referred to. I wasn't sure what that all meant, but as I saw my friends and colleagues being taken out one by one through assassination, I realized that potentially I had my life at risk. And I also realized, which I'm very, very sensitive, because I love my family. I love my children. I love my grandchildren. That if they can't get you, then they take out those who they love. And in January, one of those people was taken out. And he was a colleague and a friend. And he's no longer with us. I won't mention his name, but maybe later I will. We'll see how things go. This seems so surreal if you're reading about it or hearing somebody talk about it, but when you're experiencing it yourself and you're realizing that you are in this storm, then the reality sets in. And because of the law of the universe, which is called the duality of life, and I basically sum that up as the duality of life, there needs be opposition in all things that we might learn by our experience. And through inspiration and revelation, even my great-great-grandfather who said, even if the mouth of evil opens it to devour you, know you this, my son, that this is for your good. So, this was not necessarily the path that I chose, other than I have this driving force within me to attract, or I'm attracted to people that need help. I first realized that in high school when I was, after graduation, I was speeding down, well, not really that fast, but I was going past the speed limit. And a couple of gals behind me were trying to catch up in a convertible. And they thought they would be, I guess, cool back then, and try to pass me. So they sped up, they lost control of the car flipped over, and I watched that car in front of me drag thousands of feet down. I immediately tried to maneuver my car over to where it ended up landing on the opposite side of the road. And with several of us, we literally lifted that car up and pulled these poor souls out. I couldn't help myself, When I was serving on an ecclesiastic mission in London, I served there for 2 years. In fact, I have to add this little note. It was in London that I gave up chicken. 1970, I went to a Kentucky Fried Chicken place because that was my favorite food at the time. And when they put the special sauce on the chicken that had the skin on it and some of the feathers sticking out, and I bit into that, and it was too crunchy for me. I said, that's it. I'm done eating chicken. So I'll tie that chicken story in a little bit later. But since 1970, I haven't touched chicken. I later find out why it was such a good thing. I noticed that I was in Piccadilly Circus in London, and there's all kinds of types there, you know. You'll find everything in Piccadilly Circus. But I couldn't help but stop along the way, and I know they've done documentaries on this. As people walk away from those who need help, lying on the ground, I pulled over as a young man of 19 years old to try to help this poor soul. I haven't been able to give up that feeling of when someone needs help, I run towards it. I do not run away from it. Now, I didn't start out as a doctor, but when I was 5 years old, I wanted to be a doctor. Someone said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I said, "I want to be a doctor." Somewhere along the way, I lost that. I got involved in amateur sports, and later in collegiate sports, and then later in professional sports. So I went down this road, loving the game that I mastered, which was tennis, which took me all around the world. And I eventually retired at 29 years old and said, "Okay, that's enough. I'm tired of traveling. I've made enough money. You know, I'm done." So I started living my life in reverse. Rather than retiring at 65, I retired at 29 and started doing things that people do at 65 or 70. I started doing at the age of 29. But that only lasted a few years, and I got really, really bored. And because I have to be on the go, and I have that curious mind, a questioning mind, I went back to my roots of biology, my heartfelt and spiritual goal of I wanted to serve others and to become a doctor. I went back to school. Over a period of many years, where this started in 1983, 84, 85, I began to accumulate a lot of knowledge. And my wonderful, beautiful aunt, her name was Aunt Dit. She said, I asked her, I said, "Dit, how do you write? How are you so good at this? How do you write a book? How do you write an article?" And she said, "Simple. What you do is you think about the writing as nothing more than putting what your thoughts are down on paper. You speak really, really good, you know. All you have to do is translate those words onto a paper." Of course, one of the problems I have, I probably speak a little too fast sometimes. But this is what I started doing, and I started writing and writing and writing. And then I put an epistle together of articles that I wrote on herbs and vitamins and minerals and tissue salts. And before I knew it, I had over 300 articles that I'd written about all kinds. And I started studying different forms of medicine. I asked Dr. Jonathan, should I return back to medical school? And he said, "You wouldn't survive it." And he said, "Why?" He said, "Because you would get to the emergency room and start doing things that were totally off the protocol. You would not survive it, nor would you approve of what's going on." It wasn't a matter of education or being able to comprehend. It was a matter of it would be a very difficult thing for you to be in that environment. Them knowing me, I'm asking the question, other than just having the diploma. So I looked around and chose different routes. And over time, acquired two bachelors, 3 masters, and 3 doctorates. One being in nutrition, one being in biochemistry, which I'm still trying to help people understand, which is called pathological blood coagulation. People still read it and scratch their head. But it's something that I really cherish, and I'm happy to provide the court with this dissertation, Pathological Blood Coagulation, because it answers a very, very important question. Why does the blood coagulate inside the blood vessel? No one's ever been able to figure that out. Well, it took me many, many years to figure it out and to write schematics on how that process happens. And a lot of the work that I've been doing over the last 35 years is a result of this. Some of the people that I've had the blessing of being involved with, such as when Tony Robbins came to me for his condition, and then calling me up in the morning, screaming, saying, I can't believe how I feel. I'm literally a different person. Thank you very much. To him adopting the whole protocol, to the whole science, and then implementing that into his master university, and then taking that out to the world to millions. I later, on my nutritional thesis, I wrote a book called Sick and Tired. Some of you may know of this book. The second subtitle that is Reclaim Your Inner Terrain. And I actually wrote that in the early 90s. As I was writing this dissertation, it was approved in 96 after a whole year of just trying to make it acceptable to my professor, Harvey James from San Diego State University, who I presented this document to and said, not good enough, you need to make some changes. It took me a year to correct that. Finally, he approved it. I was so relieved to be done with my second dissertation. So pathological blood coagulation, sick and tired is actually you'll see an abstract there, is my dissertation for one of my other doctorates. It's been a very, very popular book. Even when Amazon was just starting out, it's still very, very popular, and one of the top books purchased for naturopathy. The reason I'm sharing you with this book is these books were actually used against me in my by the district attorneys and their attorneys. They use these books because of some crazy theories and thoughts that I have that are not generally accepted by current medical thought. And that is part of the judicial system in the U.S. That prosecuted me. To make it permanent, they orchestrated a civil lawsuit, of which was then, because of technicalities, regardless of the evidence, and some of the evidence was never even entered or witnessed. One of the persons who I brought into my organization, and the reason I did that was because she needed help. And the reason I did that was because she was alone, she was financially not able to take care of herself, she was pregnant. I gave her an opportunity, I took care of her, I spent tremendous amount of resources to help her and her family to get back on her feet, to a point where she embraced my work, became a spokesperson for my work, and eventually, because of her condition, which was breast cancer, she embraced this philosophy and this approach to deal with her condition. Some of the things that I knew somewhat was that she was an alcoholic, a drug addict, depressed, and I knew that, but I thought that this was not an ongoing ongoing problem. When the ranch was raided in July 23rd of 2013, and then my subsequent arrest on January 24th, 2014, I was at my home working with several patients. I was in the exercise room. We were rebounding, and officers came in and took myself and one of my assistants, and 3 of us were arrested that day. Well, I was incarcerated for 40 days and 40 nights. In fact, I got out the 40th day, and part of my release was that I would be under house arrest until the trial began. And in fact, the trial never started. The trial was never brought forward for about a year and a half. So I spent a year and a half under house arrest, and I mentioned that this was a time that I utilized to produce papers and publish papers in a lot of different subjects. In fact, during that time, I was able to publish over 20 different documents, articles. Well, one of the person that I'm speaking of, that I haven't named, she subsequently left the ranch and she went home. And eventually she, for some reason, decided to move from what she believed in and was passionate about, that literally saved her life, and become a witness for the district attorney. And was one of the ones which was shocking, because never did I ask for anything in return. There was no financial consideration. In fact, I was paying her to be there. She wasn't paying me to be there on the ranch. So there was no, my attorney at that time, he says, this is a perfect example of no good deed goes unpunished. And during the trial, she did testify against me. And, you know, as I looked into her eyes, I noticed that something had seriously changed. I still today am shocked when I even talk about it. I later learned that the district attorney, not so much from her, but from others, were offered financial consideration for testifying against me. I have an affidavit in my possession that one of those who worked for me has worked for me for close to 17 years was offered close to $100,000 to testify against me. Now, the sad thing about all of this, when I went to the civil trial, which I believe was somewhat sponsored or a continuation of my criminal trial, they were able to orchestrate one of the largest firms and attacks on me financially to make my financial my financial situation even more dire. At the end of it, I lost. And with that, a judgment was given. It is the largest judgment that ever has been given in a California court of law as a judgment. The plaintiff was awarded $105 million. In fact, it's so unconsciously ridiculous that when the judgment was given, the judge took his hands, put them over his face, and just shook his head. I witnessed this. My family witnessed this. They were in shock. And who was in the back room? But the district attorney and their minions clapping and cheering this award. They had finally accomplished their demise, their plan of demise to put me totally out of business, something that I have to now carry for the rest of my life. I appealed that to the courts, and they, not from the appeal courts, but I filed a lawsuit to have the judgment overturned. And the judge agreed in my favor that this would be overturned unless they agreed to reduce the judgment from 105 to a ridiculous 25 million. Now keep in mind, they've already devastated me financially. And usually any judgment like this would be somewhat between 5 to 10 times my ability to pay or net worth, which isn't even close to what had happened. Millions of dollars were lost. So with that, I carry this. I just filed an appeal. This woman, which is just shocking, and what was not presented at the case, it was not allowed to come in, were the PET scans from the oncologist showing the remission of her cancer. She was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer 3 months after being on my program, 3 months after PET scans were taken, showing that there was no cancer anywhere in her body. They're attacking my work and calling it pseudoscience, because if it is real, according to Dr. Neil Solomon, when Tony Robbins sent the head of research at Johns Hopkins to investigate me, say, hey, there's a guy out in Utah, lives in Alpine, Utah. I want you to investigate this guy. So by contract, he agreed to come out. He was compensated for doing so. He was only going to spend a few hours. He ended up spending 3 days. He was so fascinated with a concept which I've showed to, even today, current educated hematologists, and the words that come out of their mouths are, I've never seen anything like this. So in the sciences, people quickly come to regard as their own personal property that which they have learned and have passed on to them at the universities and the academies. If, however, someone like myself comes along with a new idea that contradicts the credo that has been recited for years and passed on to others, and in fact even threatened to overturn it, which my science does, then all passions are raised against this threat, and no method is left unturned to suppress it. People resist it in every way possible, pretending not to have heard it, speaking disparagingly of it, as if it were not even worth the effort of looking into the matter. And so a new truth can have a long wait before finally being accepted. This is Goth. I have published over 3,000 articles. I have written over 70 books. They're translated into 29 different languages. I have sold the most famous book that I watered down so the masses could understand it intentionally. It's called The pH Miracle, which sells over 5 million books. People would think that I'm a very rich man, and yet, don't let your eyes deceive you. Most of what I have, I give away. In fact, my employees at the time, before we were raided our ranch, on July 23rd, 2013, over 57 armed officers with AK, I know those are probably not the right words, but what I understand, AK-47s, because they don't carry those, but something like that, came in and raided our property. And I'm going to show you what my property's like and what we do there so you understand how ridiculous this is. So these books, The pH Miracle, The pH Miracle for Diabetes, where I did a clinical study with results on type to diabetes, complete reversal of 96% of all those who participated in the study. In type 1, it was a lower amount. It was only like 86%. And we're talking about participants that have been doing insulin, and I say doing insulin because you don't get diabetes, you have to do it. You do it with your thoughts, your words, your deeds. Once you understand the new biology, the new chemistry, the new physics, it literally underwrites everything you understand, and even how wonderful and courageous Dale's work is. Once he puts the other component, when he understands that the biggest fraud against this humanity, our humanity, is the fact that viruses have never been isolated. None. There is no measles virus. And once you understand the basic chemistry and biology of the fraud that they've perpetuated on the human race, and each year, if you ever thought about this, why is there a new virus every year with a new name, with a similar types of symptomologies? This all started with the Third Reich. And Dr. Enders and the so-called viruses. I write about this in one of my books. A second thought about viruses, vaccines, and the HIV/AIDS hypothesis. And I'm not alone. Those who have been brave enough, who stood up, even Peter Duesberg, Professor Peter Duesberg at Berkeley University, a friend of mine, who wrote the book Inventing the AIDS Virus, lost all of his funding at the university. When the Nobel Prize winner for discovering the so-called HIV virus gets exiled to Beijing because he's changing his mind about the existence of a virus. This is how bad things are. And this is how dangerous of a man I am. And the interesting thing is the things that I talk about are basic biology, things that you learn in Biology 101, such as identifying bacterial phages. Bacterial phages is a very simple thing to identify. But not one single virus, when Dr. Enders began using the same process to identify viruses by using a procedure which I'll show you, not one single virus has ever been isolated from those experiments. What we're dealing with here are cell fragments. I write about this in this paper. I finally, while I was under house arrest, had enough time to find a source of publication. I was not idle during this time. And if I was to say, if I could choose anywhere that I would want to be, I would want to be at the Rancho del Sol and Valley Center, where I spent a year and a half under house arrest. But I didn't stop working. I was not allowed to post to Facebook, but I was still allowed to publish. And so I published a lot of the things that I'm talking about now, even though it goes clear back to the 90s. I began publishing in 2015 and 2016. More recently, I shared this slide with the New Earth conference, that 95% of all sickness and diseases are caused by what you eat, what you drink, what you breathe, and what you think. And I added additional thought in there, what you believe. Your beliefs become biology. Only 5% of all sickness and disease is caused by genetics. And yet, that 5% of genetics is only triggered based upon what you eat, what you drink, what you think, and what you believe. So you have to manage your thoughts, you have to manage your beliefs, because they do change the biochemistry of the body. Therefore, 100% of all sickness and disease is caused by what you eat, what you drink, what you breathe, what you think, and what you believe. So begin to get ready to have everything that you thought you knew about biology and chemistry and medicine literally be destroyed in front of your eyes. All matter being resistant. Why? Because matter cannot be created nor can it be destroyed. This earth was organized. It was with matter that was already there. When we learn in Genesis about the creation, we talk about the genesis of Earth, our planet. It was taken from other places in the universe. Matter was organized. Another important point is matter can only change its form and its function. It can never be destroyed. That is another law of physics. It's another law of the Bible that we learn. The antibiotics and the war on humanity, which are acidic waste products of fermentation, are used to kill so-called bacteria, can only change the bacteria and not kill the bacteria. This is why we have secondary infections. A secondary infection is, well, we got rid of the bacteria, now we got to figure out what to do, because now we have a yeast infection. And anyone that's taken antibiotics for a period of time will wonder, where is all the yeast coming from? Bacteria is not a species specific. Yeast is not species specific, even though biology would make us believe that it is. The unfortunate thing is many doctors do not understand this simple principle. Germs do not cause disease, period. We have been sold a bill of goods. We have been deceived. Germs are a symptom. It's an effect of a cause and effect relationship. Now, do I recognize germs? Yes. What are they? They're cell fragments. They're biological transformations of plant, animal, and human matter, which is changing form. Is it made up of the same dust that we are made up? Absolutely. These anatomical elements were defined and analyzed. And also in print, in 1999, I went to the University of Paris, to the archives, where I waited patiently for the book called The Third Anatomical Element, the Blood, written by a 19th century medical doctor by the name of Antoine Béchamp. I had in my hand Les Microzymas, a 1,000-page book, and I read no French at all. And yet, when I held this book, just its life force energy was confirming the truth. And what Antoine did, as they gave me this book, they didn't say, hey, put these gloves on. I literally turned the pages. And as I turned the pages, I would come to micrographs. And in those micrographs was his painstaking work, where he would look under a monoscope with sunlight as its light source to see images and take his pencil or his writing instrument and literally write down what he was seeing. He would draw it. And what he was drawing was what I had witnessed 5 years earlier in a type 1 diabetic that I was called in on in Dallas, Texas, because the father wanted to save this girl's life. I want to show you that video once I finish this statement here. Germs are only the expression of the degeneration of change in matter. It is important to understand that disease is a consequence of its environment, of your lifestyle, of your diet, where you live, what you think, what you believe. You do not get sick, you do sick. All of your physical, mental, and emotional sicknesses are born within you. If we blame these things on others, all we're doing is not taking the personal responsibility for our lifestyle and dietary choices. It's a scapegoat. They are nothing more than the biological transformation of human, animal, or plant matter. Such super, and I had to coin a room because Tony said, "What do you call this?" It's not veganism, it's not vegetarianism. You know, what do you call this? And I'm sitting there with my son who loves words, and he said, "Dad, you're an alkalarian." I said, "Wow, I'm an alkalarian." We even trademarked the name. We own that name, alkalarian. What is an alkalarian? It's a human being that's living in harmony with nature, who doesn't eat processed foods, that only eats meat in times of famine. Why would you ever kill an animal? Or in cold, if you're freezing to death, but never. It's too toxic. It causes in chemistry, in the biochemistry in the body, it causes a double loss of alkalinity. I have two hypotheses that I've based all my work on. The first hypothesis is the human body is alkaline in its design. And I changed the acronym pH, which stands for potential of hydrogen and the measurement in biochemistry, to something that people could understand. I changed that to mean perfect health. Because when you are an alkalarian, you are in harmony with nature. You do not take what is not yours. We don't have to worry about superbugs. Superbugs do not destroy us. The fraud of the flesh-eating bacteria is nothing more than a fraud. Flesh-eating bacteria is systemic poisoning, whether it comes from glyphosates, 1080, over-exercising in the production of lactic acid. You're literally destroying that delicate, perfect health which needs to be maintained. So the first premise of my hypothesis is that the human body is alkaline in its design for perfect health. The second one is all functionality, breathing, thinking, moving. Your heart, for every beat, produces waste products. I call them, to make it simple, acidic waste products. They have exhaust. The body functionally uses life force energy in the form of electrical energy. We are electrical beings, but we produce functionally chemical waste. You cannot have cancer without lactic acid. It is impossible. Every patient we measure that has cancer has off-the-chart lactic acid loads. Everyone. Who is measuring this? We measure it. Why does that have to be stopped? Why does that have to be suppressed? We know because it changes what Dr. Neil Solomon, head of research at Johns Hopkins, after he finished his visit here, when I say here, Rancho del Sol, at my home, if Dr. Young's new biology, his science is proven, it will revolutionize the medical and biology worlds as we know them today. It literally destroys what is being taught in all of our school systems. Just a side note on this, Sick and Tired was a medical text at Morehouse College School of Medicine. And that's where I have another degree. That's 4, but it's an honorary degree. And they put me on a committee. And they said, the trustee of Martin Luther King said to me, Dr. Young, you have to be very careful. You are the Martin Luther King of the 21st century. Your message is so powerful, it destroys complete industries. When I was in China, when I lectured at Tsinghua University, after my lecture, I was pulled aside again. He said, Dr. Young, your science is incredible, but I want to say this. You are not Western medicine, you are not Eastern medicine, you are something totally different. You need to be very careful. At that time, being proud and youthful in my thinking, not having experienced the strong hand of the government, not having been charged 3 times, 1996, 1999, and then 2013, having maybe a little bit egotistical thinking, how can they ever get me? You can make up a lot of stuff. And that's what happened on July 23rd, 2013. They came in, and when I asked them what was their purpose, the head investigator said, "We are putting you out of business." We are shutting you down. So, Antoine Béchamp introduced a doctrine called the doctrine of pleomorphism. This was not found in favor at the time. Monomorphism, which means one form, one identity. You have a germ, it infects the body, and now we have a whole industry that has defrauded the humanity called the infectious disease complex. Let me show you what happens when you compromise the biological terrain. Listen carefully when you hear this video. What you're seeing here is phase contrast microscopy at about 20,000 magnification. You're seeing targeted red blood cells. None of them are very healthy. You're also seeing a rod here. You see this rod? This rod here that I'm pointing with my pointer, I don't know if you can see this or not. It's right in the center there. It's like anthrax bacteria. Not this one. This one's a little bit slower. Can you do the other one? Do you have that one? I think it's just a blank slate. Well, here's another one. Here's a one with hypha. It's got 2 heads. It's a rod bacteria. You can see next to it 3 red blood cells, all theoretically infected. And watch what happens as this cell transforms itself into a completely different form. This is real time, happening exactly the way it happened when I viewed it, the day that I viewed it, validating Antoine Béchamp's handwritten diagrams that took place in the 19th century that he viewed under lesser circumstances, the biological transformation of human matter that can take on different forms or provide for different functions based upon its environment. This is not a healthy environment. Now, as you look at that, what would you identify? What would the hematologist identify? They can't answer those questions because they don't study this at the university. Because if they study it and they start documenting it, it's heresy to their God. And their God is Louis Pasteur. That is their God. It's not to the truth or to the God who actually reigns in heaven, but the God of man. From that doctrine of pleomorphism, we end up focusing on not bringing harmony and balance and nature to our internal environment. We bring a war against ourselves. You see, bacteria is nothing more than a biological mutation or transformation of what used to be a healthy body cell. The question is, why? Why is bacteria born out of us? What are these macrophages that are wrongfully being identified as viruses without isolating them? Dr. Enders never isolated the measles virus, period. Luc Montagnier, sitting right next to me, in Milan, Italy, exiled. I thought he came from Paris, came from Beijing. Never isolated the HIV virus. I'll talk a little bit more about that. The cure for any disease, including lung, brain, breast, pancreatic, liver cancer, will be found in its prevention, not in its treatment. You have to understand the biochemistry of the interstitial fluids of the interstitium in order to understand what is the cause of cancer. Cancer should never be used as a noun, it should be used as an adjective. It is not a thing. Current medical science has identified it as a thing so that they can treat this thing as if it invaded based upon the same fraud that was perpetuated by Louis Pasteur. Prevention and treatment. Treatment is a specific disease or change of the internal environment. This is why our success is so extremely high. And when the word gets out, the same thing that Griffith, did I say that correctly? Yes. Was talking about, when the word gets out, people start saying, what is this? What is going on? Who is this doctor? Or is he a real doctor? And what can we do to stop this? I believe my life is still at risk, but in the law of duality, there's two opposites. One is called fear, the other one is faith. Tony Robbins and others like to say that fear is an acronym that stands false evidence appearing real. The duality of that is faith. Faith is, and this is mine, first attribute in thinking healthy. When you have faith, then the powers of the angels and those protecting angels and God and His majesty, I will not die any sooner or any later until I have finished my mission. And I want to stop this madness. I want to stop the so-called good doers who think they're doing right are doing evil. You can see it in their eyes. You can feel it in their voice. Their only gratification is they got their headline off me. They published it on Wikipedia and Google, who promotes disinformation of what the truth really is. No one's going to publish my pleomorphic documents because that would cause a lot of upset in the medical community. Well, it would also cause a lot of upset in the big pharma. Why would you need drugs when all you're doing is trying to restore the perfect health of the interstitial fluids of the interstitium, which supports the blood and the intracellular fluids? So I note to this document, this picture of alkalizing nutritional therapy and the prevention or reversal of any cancerous condition. We did have that peer-reviewed. It was published. I believe it was in 2015, 2016. And it's become very, very popular. And I'm going to share a few cases in there for you as evidence of how miraculous, what a pH miracle that actually takes place. In addition, in support of Dell's work and in helping you to make a good decision in supporting what he's doing, and hopefully that will also spill over in getting this truth out, I would like to provide 2 papers that are published: The Possible Cause of Polio, Post-Polio, CNS, PVIPD, Legionnaires, AIDS, and the cancer epidemic. And the reason I did a hyphen, because I know these aren't viruses. It's mass chemical poisoning. The people in New Zealand that are doing this aren't doing it to kill the rats. The people that are doing this in India are not doing it to kill the rats. The people that are doing this in New York are not doing this to kill the rats. They are doing it to kill humanity and to wipe out the scourge of billions of people, of those who they considered, the deplorables, quote, unquote, Hillary Clinton. So you asked a question of Dell about vaccinations. This is what a child in the first years of life receives in micrograms and milligrams, etc. 17,500 macrograms of phenoxyethanol, antifreeze, the first 6 years of life. 5,700 micrograms of aluminum, a known neurotoxin. Unknown quantities of bovine serum, 801.6 micrograms of formaldehyde, a carcinogen, embalming agent. 23,250 micrograms of gelatin, animal carcass soil. 500 micrograms of human albumin. 760 micrograms of monosodium glutamate. Unknown quantities of Merck, MRC5 cells, aborted human babies. More than 10 micrograms of neomycin, an antibiotic with cross M bones on it. More than 560 micrograms of polysorbate 80, 160 micrograms of potassium chloride, 188 micrograms of potassium phosphate, 260 micrograms of sodium bicarbonate. That's the only one I agree with, by the way. And the list goes on. 270 micrograms of sodium borate, 54,100 micrograms of sodium chloride, that's table salt, unknown quantities of sodium citrate, unknown quantities of sodium hydroxide, 2,800 micrograms of sodium phosphate, unknown quantities of sodium phosphate, monohydrate, which are toxic to the body. Sorbitol, 32,000 micrograms, Streptomycin, 0.6 micrograms, more than 40,000 micrograms of sucrose, cane sugar, 35,000 micrograms of yeast protein. Promotes, compromises the environment, which leads to an increase of fungi. We have documented this in the blood. 5,000 micrograms of urea, metabolic residues of human urine. This is what we are injecting into our newborn babies. As I said earlier, not in this format, the only thing you prove by vaccinating your children is that if they live through it, is you just poisoned them and they survived it. There is no such thing as providing immunity or antibodies against these so-called assaults when it's not about the matter, it's about the environment around the matter. People still get sick, and I'll give you some statistics here as it relates to this, particularly measles. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because this may be information overload. This was viral existence has never been scientifically demonstrated, has never been proven. All viruses from HIV, EBV, CMV, hepatitis C, West Nile virus, Ebola, measles, Zika, polio, the list goes on and on. This is how you centrifuge for determining or demonstrating the existence of virus. This is what they talk about that they do. Now here's the fraud. They don't do it. And if they do it, they don't find a virus. So there's now over 100 years of documented history and research on the polio virus and the measles virus, well, maybe less, 50 years, whether or not its treatment by inoculation has been successful in eradicating polio. I am suggesting in my article and in my lecture that there are significant findings based on historical and past and current research, including my own, that viral theory of polio and possibly other modern-day diseases, such as post-polio syndrome, and the list goes on. And other related DDT pesticides are caused by DDT-related pesticides, acidic vaccination, and other factors, including lifestyle dietary factors, rather than from one lone Pasteurian theory document to validate this theory. Look at the graph. Polio in the United States, graphic timeline, 1870 to 1998. Look at when they took DDT out. What happened? Not because of vaccination. In fact, the Salk vaccination actually caused more polio. The reason why was it was because of chemical poisoning from that vaccine and any other, on top of that, the acidic condition of the interstitial fluids, which currently are unknown to modern medicine, untested by modern medicine. And so you see polio incidence and pesticide production as it rises up and as it drops down. So we're going to be seeing more incidents of paralysis. What they do, we can't have polio. We've already cured that. So we're going to put another name on it. That's what they do in the cancer business. That's what they've done in HIV. HIV will just quietly go away, and there'll be a new name for AIDS, acquired immune deficiency. Polioincitis incidence timeline from 1912 to 1970. Why is polio on the rise? Because DDT somewhere in the world is being used, and they're importing that food into the U.S. market. And if it's not DDT, it's Roundup. Glycophosphates. And they were so convinced that it was helpful, they actually sprayed it on everyone. Even children during school, they were sprayed. So here you see the polio incidence and DDT production from 1940 to 70 in millions of pounds, and what happened as that came off. Has nothing to do with the efficacy of vaccines. I want you to understand my position on this. See, once you understand there's no virus, what's the point? What are you inoculating for? So what they did, they said, well, wait a minute, polio can't come back. We have a cure, so let's call it something else. Acute flaccid paralysis, because we can't have polio. Here are the confirmed cases, suspected cases. These are all the symptoms. They sound exactly like polio. They're trying to keep the germ theory alive. Here are the cases of polio increased in the U.S. after mass inoculation in 1955 in various states. Look at the people that were vaccinated versus those who were not vaccinated. Cases of polio increases after vaccination. Wow. Up, 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 up. And then when they tainted it with SV40, then we had an additional problem. These are all the graphs from pesticide to production that are found in my paper that has been published. Dr. Morton Biskind, who was warning against this, it was even known by 1945 that DDT is stored in the body fat in the mammals and appears in the milk. With this foreknowledge, the series of catastrophic events followed the most intensive campaign of mass poisoning in known human history. Polio was a crime against humanity. And when you go back to measles, Andrew cut down dramatically on the nutrient solution. What they did when they were doing this gradient testing for measles, they added antibiotics to the cell culture before introducing the allegedly infected fluid that had so-called measles in it. The subsequent dying of the cells were then misinterpreted the presence of also isolation of measles virus. No control experiments were performed to exclude the possibility that it was the deprivation of nutrients as well as the antibiotics which led to the cytopathic effects. I think you're getting my message here. So bacterial and viral infectious disease is an acidic condition of the body fluids. This makes it even more important that we provide the necessary tools for medical doctors, for emergency rooms, for hospitals. They have the necessary equipment to be able to test for metabolic alkalosis or metabolic acidosis in the interstitial fluids of the interstitium. And I talked about that in my talk, where we talked about the importance of this organ, which has now been claimed the largest organ of the human body. The metaphor is quite simple. When the fish is sick, you change the water. There are many scientists quietly supporting my work. We already talked about the 7 stages of acidosis. We need to educate our children about these fluids. These are the critical numbers in the prevention and reversal of any cancerous condition. Venous pH, 7.365. Arterial, 7.4. Intracellular, 7.2. Interstitial, 7.36. Bicarbonate venous, 22. Arterial, 24. Intercellular, 10. Interstitial, 24. Sodium, venous, 130. Arterial, 137. Intracellular, 100. Interstitial, 135. Urine, a pH of 7.2 or greater. If it's less than that, you are in metabolic acidosis in the interstitial fluids of the interstitium. And it's very simple. All you do is pee on some pH hydrant paper. And if it doesn't come out green or blue, you better think about what you're eating, what you're drinking, what you're thinking, and how you're living. Because if it ain't green, it ain't clean. We talked about the acidic buffers and how the stomach is the major organ for alkalinity and produces sodium bicarbonate to protect the body. This is how acid is made. But on the equation, H2O, CO2, NaCl produces what? A molecule of sodium bicarbonate. plus HCl, which is hydrochloric acid. That is the equation. Focused to keep their theory alive that the stomach is a digestive organ. Folks, it doesn't digest diddly squat. Whatever you swallow comes out the same way. Let me just give you one of the cases. It's very important. I call it the white box because within the white box, which was never unveiled in court and was later burned because of private rights, even though it belonged to Simon Hudson, who brought the white box, documenting over 2 years the cure for cancer. This was never presented. He was not allowed to testify. This was the patient. This was the person who had all his medical records. He was not allowed to testify. You cannot testify in the state of California if you're not a medical doctor. If you're not a medical doctor, you can't talk about medical things. Even though it's your body, these are your records, you can't say, hey, I had cancer, I don't have it, and here's the evidence to prove it. We don't have this once, we don't have it twice, we have it thousands upon thousands of times. The proof for this. This was presented and monitored by the University of Southern California. Dr. Andy Gill, who's a respected surgeon, he wanted to know, because he's tired of removing prostates that potentially would not have to be removed if this option was available for all humanity. I got to share just two people. My daughter, who was diagnosed with brain cancer, this is what she followed. We have a simple program. It works, and it's directed specifically at the interstitial fluids of the interstitium. This is published, the science on this, 59-year-old male, MRI blood tests, reveals cancer, prostate, 3 lesions, hepatitis C, and cytomegalovirus, which are basically bacterial phages, enlarged prostate, arteriosclerosis, high PSA, high Gleason score, high bilirubin, low pH, low sodium bicarbonate, 24 months of treatment, reversed all conditions. We presented that to the trustees. They brought in their actuaries. The treatment runs around $800 versus $15,000 to $30,000 a day on conventional treatment. Financially, they cannot afford to implement a program like this, because if they do, they can't sustain their salaries and sustain their current budget that they have intact. So this was the blood before, this was the blood after. He did 3 biopsies. How do you identify cancer? You have to identify cancer by tissue samples. 3 biopsies taking between 16 to 18 tissue samples. No cancer anywhere in the prostate, in the uterus, all the way up to the kidneys. Tissue samples were taken. He was declared. Last one, and then I'll turn it over to you, Sasha. Thank you so much for your patience on this. Pulmonary adenocarcinoma lung cancer is responsible for 40% of all lung cancers. It is incurable. There is no treatment. If you're diagnosed with this, you have anywhere from a few weeks to 6 months. This woman came to the ranch. Sorry I haven't enough time to show you the ranch. I'd love you to see it. Diagnosed by PET scan, CT scan, no chemotherapy, no radiation, no surgery. She came to the ranch. We put her on that perfect health program. We focused on those items that I showed you briefly, which are totally non-invasive. And this is why I was arrested. I was arrested, thrown in jail, on Wikipedia it says for 3.7 years. Was in jail for 5 months. But it doesn't sound good. That's not long enough for somebody that's really breaking the law. You know, just 5 months. I agreed to that 5 months because I didn't want to go through the hell that they were putting me through. And my family said, Dad, let it go. You are not your titles. You are not your research. We love you who you are. Let it go. Your work stands for itself. We know who you are. The world will know who you are. And now, you all know who I am.
Dr. Robert Young, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Chief Justice, any questions from you?
Only one, a fairly simple one. If one wants not to have cancer or have disease, can it be done just by simple lifestyle changes of not eating meat, not drinking, eating the right foods?
There's loads of research, as you know. If you smoke and stop smoking, your chances for lung cancer goes down. There's loads of research, including my own. If you stop eating beef, chicken, pork, and fish, your stomach cancer, incidence of stomach cancer and bowel cancer basically goes to zero. Okay? There is a cancer for every food you eat. If you drink alcohol, if you want to prevent cancer of the liver and the pancreas, number one cause of pancreatic cancer is alcohol. Same for the liver. If you don't want liver cancer or pancreatic cancer, then you don't drink alcohol. As I mentioned in the first slide, well, maybe the second slide of my presentation, 95% of all sickness and disease can be controlled by what you eat and what you drink and what you breathe. Okay, that is so true. I have documented that. I have published on this. We have millions of people around the world that are walking testimonies of humanity that what I speak is true.
Thank you. Your Grace, any questions from you?
Not really, only I regret I did not bring my two grandsons who are studying medicine to listen to you. But ultimately, they'll get in touch with you.
Well, one of the doctors who was trained in medicine who came to study under me, medical doctor, he has 2 medical degrees. He's not only a medical doctor, but he's also a surgeon in dentistry. So he's an oral surgeon and a medical doctor, but he specializes in oral surgery. After he spent 2 weeks with me, he said, Dr. Young, I hate you. I said, wow, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I said, why do you hate me? He said, you just destroyed 13 years of my education in 2 weeks. I said, I don't know what to do when I go back. I said to him, I said, look, you continue to do that. You take all the good and you combine it with this, you will help so many more people. And that's what he did. And we have so many medical doctors. Here's a perfect example in the front row, Dr. Galina Magalko, who's been trained as a medical doctor. And she's an incredible specialist in non-invasive medical diagnostics. She's a sleuth. What cannot be found, we find. We have so many people around the world that come to us. Oh, we've gone to so many doctors, but we cannot find what's wrong. They say, there's nothing wrong with me. The way they come to us and we find what's going on because we are focused on those interstitial fluids.
I'm going to ask Commissioner Thomas Brown, please, any questions?
Okay, do I have my microphone? Yes. Well, Dr. Young, I have to say, listening to you and just really, I had heard about you in the past more just because of your troubles in the law. I'd see things. And I'm familiar with Béchamp and Naissans and all these different ideas, but I haven't had the discipline and cognitive integrity that I can see that you've put in along with your measured passion to bring this forward. So I can really see here, this isn't just an evolution in the ideas of medicine. This is a metamorphic transformation. So I'm actually deeply honored to sit here and learn from you as I listen. So a couple of questions. Well, one of the first things that pops in my mind, because I've been looking at all this different science on the microbiome, and now we're looking at the pleomorphism, which I've kind of known, but I've sort of separated in my mind, because I've read Béchamp and stuff 30 years ago. So I'm just really starting to put all these ideas together again. I suppose because we're looking now, like I saw in Trends in Microbiology, they're talking about viruses, the relationship between like viruses and exosomes, right? And everything's moving around in there. I'm being a bit vague here. You'll understand what I'm talking about, though. Where does this leave us with the concept of the microbiome?
Leaves you in a very bad situation. It's another false theory. You see, you only have one instrument in the human body to digest food, and that's your teeth. The small intestine is not a place to be breaking up food. The small intestine is an environment of integrity to pH at 8.4, and it's the root system, which are called the intestinal villi, and the crypts where this liquefied alkaline food that the stomach is pouring sodium bicarbonate on, the gallbladder is pouring bile, and the pancreas through the pancreatic duct is secreting sodium bicarbonate to raise that pH up to that 8.4 to prepare it for biological transformation into stem cells. If you don't get to that particular point, what you end up getting is all the microbiome, which is nothing more than a chaos condition of the small intestine, the deterioration of the intestinal villi, and a shortening of those intestinal villi, which is directly related to the shortening of the telomeres.
Right.
So you foreshorten, you literally give a haircut to those intestinal villi. You cannot produce the erythroblasts, which are produced in the crypts of the small intestine, not in the bone marrow. They're only produced in the bone marrow when you're starving to death. That's why I don't recommend long-term fasts, because it literally destroys the skeleton and the muscular system and all the organs, because the body produces 5 million red blood cells per second where you're eating or not eating. So you have to change your thinking here. And the microbiome is going to fall on its face just like all these other theories, because they're promoting this nutritional supplement or this drug and not recognizing by testing the efficacy of what's going on in the gut and also how it's affecting the blood plasma chemistry, pH included, and the interstitial fluids of the interstitium, which you've never had done. So I can say that. I don't even know you that well. But none of you know anything about what's really going on in your body, because you get either false positives or false negatives from some hematological test, from doing a complete blood count and all the other parameters that are nothing more than a misrepresentation of what really is going on.
Right.
So the gut does not digest food.
Commissioner, does that approach the answer that you were looking for?
I could go on for hours listening to this.
Yeah, well,
good
exactly,
gentleman
and I
here.
dare say you will be later on today. Any other succinct questions you may have?
No, thank you. That was really the main one that was on my mind. There's many questions, but I think that this will go on. So
I appreciate your questions. I encourage you to think deeply, because I want you to understand. I wanted those even who don't understand me to understand.
That's why I tried to ask a simple question like that with a somewhat
Good luck
complex
on that. Dr. Young, you're the first witness in the last couple of days to bring forward you touched on the apparent murder of a colleague. That's not your word. That's my word. But that is not lost on this commission of inquiry. In fact, I can tell you that underpinning the imperative of this commission of inquiry is the recent apparent murders, assassinations of multiple natural practitioners and advocates of natural cures. Are you happy to hear that? That this commission that is an imperative underpinning this.
You're making me cry.
Oh.
Thank you for bringing the matter up early today. You've also reminded us, incredibly succinctly, that we have made very little, if any, progress since the medieval times as it relates to how the greatest souls amongst us, healing, treating, curing, redeeming, saving humanity from itself, are witch hunted as heretics, burned at the stake.
My great-great-great-grandmother was the first person who had a choice. She could either be hung or burned at the stake. And if she admitted to being a witch, then she was given the choice and she was hung. My great-great-grandfather, Brigham Young, and the petition, Governor Boggs, who issued an order to exterminate and kill all of those who followed my grandfather. An extermination order just because of what they believed, which forced them from their homes in Missouri to the Great Salt Lake. It is my family that has settled most of the western part of the United States. It is my grandfather, my great-grandfather, that continued this tradition. And I guess I'm following in line of their tradition of assignment from God on high, because the carnal, sensual, devilish nature of man, when they receive power, they use unrighteous dominion over others.
Indeed, indeed. You mentioned earlier, Dr. Young, I was not allowed to post on Facebook, but I was still allowed to publish. I actually have a question for the Chief Justice, being the most learned amongst us in matters of law. Who the devil is permitted to tell a living man that he is not allowed to post something in the air on something called Facebook, number one, but that he's still allowed to publish and write things down on bits of paper? How does this stand in law? What fiction has crept into our midst?
Well, the fiction is that people think that Facebook is a public source information tool that can be used. It is privately owned and privately controlled, and it is run from Ireland. As an Irishman, I hesitate to say, but it is run from Ireland. As the reason it's in Ireland is nothing to do with learning; it's to do with taxation. And it's basically a private entity, and if you own something, you can decide, like if you own your restaurant, you can decide who eats there and who doesn't.
Right.
But you can publish.
Sir, but I believe in this case, this was the court ordered you, correct?
Well, the court ordered a gag order.
Yeah.
They also ordered, but they lifted my. They gave me. They said, well, you need to be able to make a living because this has cost me and our families, and we're still under attack, by the way.
Yes. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
The court would issue a gag order on the basis that you are not to use a public information source because you have offended against some statute or ruling that they say is the law. Not natural law, but what they say is the law.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that there is a Senate bill, it's called Senate Bill 577, which allows you to practice medicine without a license as long as you do not do surgery or prescribe legend drugs.
Yeah. It's similar with the legal profession that you're allowed to give legal advice provided you don't charge for it or get any benefit from it or whatever.
But you can, in this case, under SB 577, you can charge for it, you can make money, And the reason why it passed was because there's lots of scientists, there's lots of naturopaths that haven't gone to, there's only 1 or 2 schools in the United States that you can actually get a qualified certification that's approved in the state of California that they'll accept.
Oh, yes.
You see, so it's very exclusive. And when I was going to school again, it was in the 80s and 90s, going back to some of the stories or whoever's told what was going on in the 80s and 90s. I mean, this was like strange. You know, what are you writing? What are you eating? Grass? Not smoking it? You know, what's wrong with
I'd
you?
like to narrow the focus, if I may, at this time. 2013, the last time you were arrested, the head investigator said, "We're putting you out of business." That is not something that will be lost on this investigation. And that individual, Justice, am I allowed to ask who was that man? What was his name? And what agency did he represent?
You're certainly allowed to ask, and he can decline to answer unless he says he is a public official authorised by law. You can then demand that he give his identity because he is using the cudgel of the law.
Well, his name is Jim Clark.
Is
And
that,
he happened-
is that
he-
Clark with an E?
Jim Clark, C-L-A-R-K, James Clark. And he was hired by my attorney, who was the district attorney prior to his being voted out, which was a huge mistake on my part to hire a former district attorney, because when it came time when he actually perjured himself in his testimony, and I brought that to the attention of my attorney, he would not ruin this man's career, even though he lied under oath.
What agency was he representing in that capacity?
He was representing the district attorney of San Diego County,
Very good.
California.
Well, thank you very much for that. One question from me. Where does any synthetic molecule serve the living?
They don't.
Right.
I mean, none.
And am I right in suggesting that a medicine, by definition, is something which contains synthetic molecules, something that is registered, patented, and put into the market as a medicine?
Absolutely.
Proper. Right. So what I'm learning from you, Dr. Young, is that a quadrillion-dollar enterprise is at work amongst us, decimating, culling the human family,
Intentionally.
intentionally using synthetic molecules, which by design are cancer, AIDS, all of the
It's,
bogeymen
for
we
the-
could dream up.
Yeah, it's for the purpose of sterilization and population control. There's too many people on the planet we need to get rid of. In the words of Bill Gates, at least 3 billion people need to die. So we'll just start off in Africa. We'll start doing our research there, and we'll eliminate most of the Africans because they're deplorable. They're worthless. They're not part of this world economy. So they have their rights taken away, and they're suppressed and they're experimented.
And the multilateral agencies and the health and regulatory so-called authorities and agencies appear in the main to have become weaponized and appear, I again use the word appear advisedly, we're not casting judgments here, we're taking depositions, listening to expert testimonies, appear to be weaponized and appear to be working in collusion against the living men and women of the soil. Is that a fair statement?
It is. It's not a bacterial war. It's a systemic poisoning war, and they're using chemical warfare against all of us.
Have you, in your years, defined anything close to the atom seed of who and what they are? We know about the agencies, we understand the acronyms, but have you come close at all to identifying who and what they are?
I haven't met these Luciferian people. wherever they may be. They hide because they fear the light of which I represent.
Thank you, Doctor. Dr. Young, Chief Justice, and His Grace, both. I knew that would incite His Grace. Chief Justice, please.
No, this is not a question. You said that you'd heard that there was basically a plan to eliminate a third of the population. The population of the world, and Africa was the main target because the people there are worthless. I just want to say that a colleague of mine, and I make it clear when I say a colleague, someone I know professionally, who is very highly placed. He's not a friend. He's just someone I know who went to the conference at Davos just recently. And the people who go to Davos are the architects and controllers of money and the politics of the world. And he came back and he said to me that it is a definite systematic plan because they have worked out they need to get rid of at least a third of the people on the earth. And I said to him, does that include me? And he said, no, it doesn't include you because you're of European stock.
You're one of us.
Yeah, well,
I'm not one of them,
these are
but-
not my words. These are Bill Gates' words.
Yeah.
Just Google Bill Gates and depopulation and sterilization. You'll hear out of his own mouth the plan. And then if that's not enough for you, then listen to Henry Kissinger in his words, where he talks about how this is a win-win situation. And the mandation and mandating vaccines is part of the plan for depopulation and
His Grace had a question. Forgive me, Counsel.
Not a question. Only a word of encouragement, Dr. Young. I will tell you later when we meet after this session. I have much in common with you. I've been blacklisted for almost a quarter of a century. They tried to plant weapons in our home. I was accused that I subsidized terroristic and subversive activity, different activities in Israel and the West Bank. And then I ended up invited by the different parties witnessing the Nobel Peace Prize given to Chairman Arafat, Prime Minister Rabin, and later President Peres. I was there in Oslo. Never lose hope. You're going to win.
Your Grace, thank you.
Thank
Counsel,
you.
I'm sorry, you're going to have to bring it to later on. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
I'm going to have to draw it to an end now. Lunch has already been served, and we can't be late for the second session. Dr. Robert Young, thank you so much. This commission
Yeah, thank
salutes
you.
you.